Today, we're talking about a team that I always love to talk about. We'll look back on memory lane, we'll talk about their offseason, and we'll compare the two. This is the first one where it's real close. Who's better, Buffalo or Ottawa? We'll get into it coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel. If you want to watch the show, you can do that there. And if you are not a texter to our Locked On Sabres text club, you can sign up. You could join by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres where you can sign up there. Sneaky Joe DiBiase on today's show. Very excited to have this show because I love talking about Ottawa, whether it's looking back on Ottawa, whether it's looking forward, Sabres versus Senators, because I have thought for a couple of years that one of these two teams are going to be the one that jumps up with the big four. Tampa, Boston, Florida, Toronto. That's been the big four in the Atlantic Division for a while now. The other four, the bottom four, Montreal, Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, not necessarily in that order, have all been jockeying to try to jump up and join that club. And nobody's been able to do it yet. And I have thought for a long time now, a few years at least, that it was going to be the Sabres or the Senators that were able to do that. So far, neither's done it. And maybe this year will be different. We'll compare the two as we go forward here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Not really much to get to in the way of news, although I actually must say that the preseason is getting kind of close. We're well within a month now. And actually, I shouldn't say that there isn't a lot of news. For the month of August, we actually have a good amount of news to get to on today's show. We have two items to talk about before we launch into the Senators. One, there was a little bit of a back and forth this week. One report from Europe and then the local guys here in Buffalo kind of poo-pooing it a little bit. That the report from Europe over in Czechia was that the Sabres were going to have a PTO, a professional tryout at training camp for Filip Zadina. Filip Zadina, once upon a time, a top pick of the Detroit Red Wings. We're talking about a winger here, right winger, was drafted 6th overall in the 2018 NHL draft, played 5 years with the Red Wings, never got off the ground. 10 goals was his high for the Red Wings. And he was supposed to be a guy that put the puck in the back of the net. Then he went to San Jose, which is where he spent last season on a tanking Sharks team. He had 13 goals and 23 points. 13 was his career high, playing 72 games. Never got going in the NHL. And it maybe has sounded like he was going to play in Europe, and maybe he still will play in Europe. But here was this report like, oh, Sabres going to have a PTO with him. And he's only 24 years old. So like, all right, flyer on this guy, throw a flyer on him, see if any chance he can realize his potential as a prospect. But it doesn't appear that's going to happen because there was Lance Lysowski or a couple of other guys. Joe Yerdon maybe was the first one to it, but a couple of different Sabre media guys said that report is false. That there's been maybe discussions. There's nothing yet decided. There's nothing yet agreed to between the two sides that he's going to be in Buffalo. So maybe that still ends up happening, but for right now, don't hold your breath. And it's a guy that you wouldn't expect to make the team even if he was there, in my opinion. So not too worried about it. The other big news is that we've got a Jumbotron, and we've got our first look at what the Jumbotron looks like. So here it is. If you're watching along on our YouTube channel, the Sabres putting these photos out the other day. If you're not to isolate the audio audience here, but basically what you have is you have a bigger Jumbotron than what the Sabres had before. And to me, the greater feature, as you can see in this photo here, is that there is an LED screen that wraps around the entire thing. Like the whole thing is the screen. It's just one big cube that is, the corner of it will have stuff on it. Whereas before, of course, you had the 4 screens that were all attached to the big, whatever, metal piece. This is just one big screen that wraps around the whole thing. So if you've seen the Pittsburgh Jumbotron, it really is looking like almost a carbon copy of that. It looks like a carbon copy of the Penguins Jumbotron. So this is not, the Lightning's Jumbotron or what the Houston Rockets have one of these where the thing is enormous and it stretches like the entirety of the ice. The Sabres don't have one of those, but I don't really know that you need one anyway. This is a big upgrade. And sure, it's not the best in the league, but it's going to be one of the more updated ones. So I'm excited to have it. That arena needs a lot of things that are updating. The roof and the Jumbotron's a nice little start. Let's get to the seats and the concourse next. They also upgraded the food last year a little bit. So, all right, slowly but surely, we're starting to get a little by little with the arena upgrades. So, new Jumbotron to enjoy when you go to home games this coming fall, winter, and spring. So that's the news of the day. Let's get into the Atlantic Division. And we have done the top 4 teams. If you missed our previous shows and you want to hear comparisons and what the offseason was like for Boston or Tampa or Florida or Toronto, you can check that out in the feed. But now we're going to get to the teams where it starts to get real close. And the first team in that discussion will be Ottawa. We're going in order of the odds. And by the odds, Ottawa has the 5th best odds to win the Atlantic Division. But by the odds, and by the same as most people's opinions, I would think, there is a massive gulf between Boston at number 4 and Ottawa at number 5. And not everybody would put Ottawa at number 5. I'm going to tell you at the end of the show why I would not put Ottawa at number 5 in this division going into the year. But before we get into the team right now, memories. We've gone down memory lane. Sorry for last show being so depressing. You talked Boston memories, and we talked Lucic and Miller, and it's hard to not be like, man, they stole your soul when you're talking about Boston memories. Boston, you might have some of the worst memories. The complete opposite is true when you talk about Ottawa. We were talking about this. I pointed this out in our text line this afternoon. I don't think there is another team in the league that you could say has a better list of memories, if you're a Sabre fan, than Ottawa. I would bet if you put together a list of the top 5 memories against each team, Ottawa's going to end up number 1. Easily, maybe even going to end up number 1. I'm not even thinking about this one because this is more recent, but somebody just texted in on our text line, what about Craig Anderson's last game? That's the final home game 2 years ago. They had missed the playoffs, right? But Anderson gets that final start and after they've been eliminated, and Casey Middlestat scores in overtime. They're wearing black and red. It's Anderson's last hurrah, if you will. So not like the top memory, but even that's not a bad one. Of course, your top memories against Ottawa are some of the best memories in Sabre history, especially somebody of my age. But before we get to the ones that I remember, there is one from before my time. I'm alive, but I think I'm only 2 years old, so I don't remember watching it. But the only Game 7 win in Buffalo Sabres history, if you can believe it, was against Ottawa. And it was in overtime. And it was at home. So even though it was the first round, it's an elite Sabre memory. Derek Plant scoring in overtime to beat the Ottawa Senators, a newly restarted Senators team in 1997. Slap shot, a total 90s NHL goal, right? Never would be scored today. Derek Plant just comes in from center. He kind of curves in right after he gets to the blue line, rips a slap shot, and it just dribbles through Ron Tugnut into the net. Sabres beat the Senators. They advance to the second round. And RJ with one of his great calls of all time. Are you ready, Legion of Doom? Here come the Buffalo Sabres. The perfect pause, by the way, before that call, too. The fans going nuts. It's a great, great clip to watch back. That's one of your elite Ottawa memories, of course. And then 0506 and 0607. No team has consistently made me feel the way Ottawa did in my sports life. As a 29-year-old Buffalo sports fan growing up, no team has ever compared to Ottawa for me. And it's why I still have a little bit of that fire. It's not burning that hot anymore, but there's still a little bit of that fire when I see that logo, when I see those two teams play against each other. There's a little bit of that hate, even still residual left over from those couple of years. And part of it is, like the Bills have been great here for a couple of years, but it's kind of been back and forth. New England was competitive with the Bills for 1 year while they were great, and then it was Miami for a year, and now I guess it's going to be the Jets, but wasn't this sustained back and forth. And even those teams, because it's football, you only play them once or twice a year, or you'll play them twice a year if they're in your division. I guess Kansas City would be like that if you're a Bills fan, but the Chiefs always beat the Bills in the playoffs too, so it feels so one-sided that, it doesn't give you that same feeling. Whereas Ottawa, man, it was back and forth. It was back and forth. If you go to that 0506 year regular season, Ottawa clobbered the Sabres a few times there. But then you got to the playoffs, and there you go. Sabres win in 5. And then 0607, it's a little more balanced in the regular season. The Sabres win the brawl game, right? But then they go to the playoffs, and then Ottawa wins in 5. So you've got some great memories, though. But it was a back-and-forth series. Both teams were great. Both teams made it to the conference finals. The Senators, of course, though, making it to the Stanley Cup final once. The Sabres did not in those 2 years. But you feel like maybe it's a little bit even on those two sides. So those 2 years, though, provided some of the best sports memories of my life. It's the brawl game. The brawl game is, I listened to it before, and I like to do this with the brawl game where I'll just listen to RJ. I'll watch the clip enough. I've watched the clip enough times. Let me open the video and click a new tab and just listen to RJ tell me what's happening and let my imagination run wild as if I'm driving around and I haven't watched it. That game is the greatest regular season game maybe in Sabre history, right? It's your rival. You're injured. You're missing all your guys. Clark MacArthur's playing, and Patrick Coletta plays his first NHL game. There's a long list of guys that were out of that game. Briere didn't play. That's not true. Briere did play in that game. There were other guys that didn't play, though. And, of course, Drury got knocked out in the midst of it. That game's incredible. That game is, Lindy yelling at Brian Murray and Marty fighting and Peters going after guys. And if you watch the alternate replay, you see Adam Mayer getting one in on Jason Spezza. Spezza really got the short end of the stick of anybody that was on the ice for that. So the brawl game is an elite core memory. Pominville in Game 5 in Ottawa, that is one of the great Sabre memories of all time. You've got 3 of the greatest Sabre memories ever, all against the same team. Derek Plant, Jason Pominville, and the brawl. I don't think any other team is beating that. For list of Sabre memories, like opponent, who's got the better list? Ottawa's got the best list. We feel like I feel like Ottawa's just, it always feels like to me that couple of years was as good as it got. And maybe you wished it was for longer. It was only for 2 seasons. It could hoped it would have been for 5 or 6, but of course Sabres fell apart there. Ottawa started to taper a little bit as well. So Senators, Sabres memories. If you got any that are kind of floating under the radar there, let me know what you think. You can do that on our text line if you want, or you can also tweet us in at Locked On Sabres. So when we come back, what about the Ottawa of present? This Senators team, what they added, what they lost in the offseason, and whether or not they are above the Sabres going into this season. That's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. I mean, it's not too far around the corner. If you want to go to a Sabres-Senators game coming up this fall, summer, or fall, winter, or spring, you can do that by checking out the Gametime app. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. That makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Gametime Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets, including some people that might put the tickets, at a crazy price. So check out Gametime picks with the Gametime app. Gametime, 50% off Labor Day offer for select baseball games, by the way. If you're looking for a day trip coming up this weekend, check out the app and check out their Labor Day offer for this weekend. Gametime picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Check out the views of your seats. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what you're going to be looking for. Lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Make sure to make your next listen Locked On NHL if you're looking for the latest around the league, or Locked On Bills with our buddy Joe Marino, who's got you covered on all the Bills cuts and beginning to look ahead to the Arizona Cardinals next week. For our purposes, all right, let's talk about the Senators as we get closer and closer to the season for the Buffalo Sabres. Ottawa, what did they do this offseason? Well, it was an offseason that was a little quiet by their standards because for a couple years in a row, they've made some big moves. This year, they made one, but it was maybe more about who they lost. They lost a guy they had taken a swing on in the past. Jacob Chychrun traded to the Washington Capitals. A big investment by the Senators, a guy that we spent months talking about for the Sabres, that said, yeah, I'd like to move on again. He decided I was good to go to Ottawa, and then after 94 games, said I'd like to go somewhere else, and he ends up going to the Washington Capitals in a trade this offseason. That's a big loss in the top four. That's a guy who played over 22 minutes a night, 41 points, 14 goals last year, a player that I've liked going back to his days, of course, with the Coyotes. I wanted the Sabres to trade for him, especially after I saw the price that Ottawa had to give up for him a couple of years ago, but now he's gone. So that's a loss in their top four. He's the big loss. Otherwise, Matthew Joseph, Eric Brandstrom, Parker Kelly, nothing really that they can't get over. The big addition Ottawa has this offseason is trading for Linus Ullmark. Linus Ullmark, Ottawa was not on his no-trade list, so he's perfectly willing to go there, at least for 1 year. The thing with him, though, is he's a UFA at the end of the contract. So Ottawa's got to figure out what's going to happen here. I mean, is he a deadline trade if they're not competitive? What do they think the odds are they can get him re-signed? Because as of right now, there's nothing worked out on that front. So that's going to be interesting is Ullmark. But that's a nice sign. That's a nice trade. They gave up a first-round pick, so they definitely paid the price to get him. They also give up Jonas Korpisalo back in the deal. It's almost a net positive, though, for the Senators because they're getting that contract off their books. They retained a little bit of salary on it. So they send Korpisalo, who they signed last offseason, to a big money contract 1 year in. That's not going well, and that was predictable by a lot of people. So they had to give him back to Boston as almost a net, Boston doesn't want him. They're having to give up value in the trade by getting Korpisalo to go there. So maybe that's why they had to give a first-round pick for a rental goaltender. But Ullmark, listen, he won the Vezina last year. And even when he was a Sabre on a team that wasn't as good as Boston, he was always a good goaltender. He was always a good goaltender, at least. He had good numbers almost every year of his career. He's had 1 year with elite numbers. And a lot of goalies have that. In Boston, everything came together, right? The team was all-time great. The blue line was good. The system was perfect for him. So everything kind of fell together for him in Boston. Is that going to happen in Ottawa? Probably not. Like, what probably is going to happen is Ullmark's going to be an upgrade for them. But he's not going to be a Vezina candidate. He's not going to be a Vezina caliber goaltender. But that's fine. That's still an upgrade for the Senators over what I think they had in Korpisalo. I just question whether he's going to be there all year. Because, again, deadline time comes and they're 8 points out. What do? You probably sell them at the deadline. So not a long-term solution, in my opinion, for the Senators. Other additions, David Perron. Ottawa and Detroit kind of trading some of their guys back and forth recently. DeBrincat went from Ottawa to Detroit last year. This year, Perron leaves in free agency, goes to the Senators, veteran player. It's been around the block. Still not a bad player. Nick Jensen will help fill in on their blue line for the loss of Jacob Chickard. I think right now Jensen's probably penciled in to their top 4. And that is when we will get to who's better, Sens or Sabres, because I do want to talk up, actually, before we talk about the reason why I might have Ottawa below the Sabres, one thing Ottawa's got going for them, a couple things they got going for them. They got a nice young nucleus still. That's one thing the Sabres have, right? Like, the nucleus still looks pretty good. Excited about Peterka, excited about Quinn, excited about Thompson, of course, still, Dahlin. Ottawa has a true number 1 center in Tim Stützle, in my opinion, and is still very young and only 22 years old. He did regress last year, went down from 39 goals to 18 goals, but he kept the assist number there. Still a great playmaker and was a 70-point guy, although, again, 90 points the year before, so we saw some regression from Stützle. The guy we saw a big year from, though, is Jake Sanderson. Jake Sanderson is a number 1 defenseman right now in the NHL. He's a great defenseman, bordering on elite if you can get the point totals up a little bit further offensively. Because he was someone that a year ago was very comparable to Owen Power. Very comparable. Top pick that has a lot of good traits and has shown some nice things, but had yet to really put it all together. Last year, Sanderson really put it all together. Power didn't quite yet. Power is still, I think, searching for the answers in his own end and is still trying to become that all-around controlling defensive defenseman. Sanderson did that. You go to his Evolving Hockey page, and last year, Sanderson's defensive impact, he was a 95th percentile player. He was an elite defensive defenseman, in addition to providing what he does offensively for them. So Sanderson's a great number 1 defenseman in the league today. But I got problems with the rest of it, and that's where I get to maybe putting the Sabres above them for this upcoming year. We'll get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Wrapping things up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, who's better, the Sabres or the Senators? I would give the slight edge to the Sabres going into this year. I like their roster just a little bit more than I do Ottawa's. Also, I should have mentioned this when it comes to the big changes Ottawa had this offseason. Both these teams, the Sabres and the Senators, just hired Devils coaches. Lindy began the year as the Devils coach last year. Travis Green finished the year as the Devils coach. Neither were retained by the Devils. Buffalo and Ottawa decided to sign him. The Sabres hire Lindy. The Senators hire Travis Green. Now, Lindy got fired midseason. He was used as the scapegoat. Lindy Ruff's a better coach than Travis Green is, in my opinion. Lindy's got a track record. And Lindy had success there in New Jersey. And Lindy got fired because the season was going really poorly. And they were maybe trying to salvage it right there at the end. Well, go back and look at that season. Lindy's points percentage last year with the New Jersey Devils, 64 points in 61 games. A .525 points percentage. Last year, the year he got fired, he had a .525 points percentage. Travis Green had a .405 point percentage. They got worse in the 21 games that Travis Green was their head coach. They got worse. So the Senators hired the lesser of the Devil coaches. last year. And Lindy, of course, has got, all the wins before that, all the regular season wins before that, the year with the Devils right before, all the years in Dallas, the years with Buffalo. Like, Lindy's got a track record. Lindy's made the playoffs everywhere he's gone. Lindy's had number one, seasons in the standings everywhere he's gone. Travis Green has finished above 500 one time in 7 seasons as a head coach. One time. He has made the playoffs one time as a NHL head coach. His finishes in his division based on per season: 7th, 5th, 4th, 7th, 5th, 7th. He's never finished higher than 4th in a division. Travis Green's career record in the NHL is 141, 159, and 35. That is a points percentage for his career of 473, 47.3%. Whereas Lindy for his career is at 552. That's a significant jump, 8 percentage points higher. So I don't like the Senators coach. I like the Sabres coach more. I'm more optimistic about Lindy than I would be about Travis Green. The Sabres, I think, have a deep blue line and have potential littered through the blue line. They have an elite defenseman in Dahlin, and then they've got a lot of potential below that in Power and in Byram, and I think in Ryan Johnson to a much lesser extent, but then you've got Samuelson on the blue line too. Like, the Sabres have got a deep blue line. Ottawa, I think, is really searching for answers once they get past their top 2 guys. I like Thomas Chabot. Listen, there are some things to like there about Chabot. He plays a lot of minutes for them. He can put up some points. So not against him at all. And he's got a big cap number, right? $8 million. So while I think he might be a little bit of an overpaid player, he's a good player. He's a very good player. In fact, what do we got last year for his evolving hockey page? I didn't bring that up right before. He is, what I thought. Very good offensively, but below average defensively for Thomas Chabot. Other than that, I don't really like their blue line. I think they leave a lot to be desired, and I think they're going to get scored on this year. So Artem Zub is a good player, but it's not. I think the Sabres have a better blue line. Forward-wise is where I might give slight advantage to Ottawa because I think they can score. They've got talent. It's going to be a little bit dependent, though, on whether or not Josh Norris is able to stay healthy this year. He's, I think, going to be their number 2 center, at least on paper. And I know the latest update on him was that he should be ready for training camp. He had, I think, shoulder surgery right at the end of the season. So if he can come back healthy, then I think I give slight advantage to Ottawa because Tim Stützle is great, and Giroux is still pretty good at this age, and Brady Tkachuk's a great player, and Drake Batherson's a good player. So Ottawa, I think, is a better scoring team. So top 6, I would give them the advantage. But I like the Sabres blue line better, and I honestly like the Sabres in goal better because Luukkonen's in the fold all year, and I'm not sure Ullmark is. And Devin Levi is a very high ceiling goaltender that I have told you on every show I've talked about him. I think he's got star potential in the NHL. And I think last year he was way better than people think. And after you get through Ullmark, it's Anton Forsberg in Ottawa. So I give advantage in goal to Buffalo. I give advantage on the blue line to Buffalo. I give a slight advantage forward to Ottawa. So I think it's really close. It wouldn't surprise me one way or the other who was better. But I would give a slight edge to Buffalo. The point totals, it's pretty close. Ottawa is sitting at 90.5 over-under point total. The Sabres are at 88.5. So very, very close, within 1 win of each other over an 82-game schedule. The Senators' odds to win the division are plus 1,000, which is that's 5th, but it's Boston plus 500 at 4th, and then all the way down to Ottawa at plus 1,000 at 5th. So we'll see. Can one of these freaking teams jump up and catch the top 4? Hasn't happened yet. I think the Sabres and the Senators probably have the best case to jump up, more than Detroit and Montreal. But we'll talk about those 2 teams as we progress here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you agree with me about the Senators, if you disagree about something about the Senators, or if you got a memory, an under-the-radar one, especially about Ottawa, let me know what you think. Check out our text line. If you're not already a texter, hit us up. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres is where you can sign up. That's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Again, go make your next listen Locked On Bills. Get ready for the regular season, which is fast approaching. We'll talk to you next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.